Hi, good morning, everybody. Then my name is Nandavani, just in case you don't know me, and I'm zooming in from Seal Rocks, where I live. I've chosen today to call my talk Intimacy in Practice. I actually thought I'd push the envelope a little bit further and say, even go as far as saying intimacy as the path. So the American Zen Roshi, Shunryu Suzuki, wrote a famous book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, some time ago. And a very beautiful quote from that, which I think has a lot of relevance to my talk, is, and I quote, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few." Following on from Suzuki, a later, more modern Zen practitioner, Zenke Blanche Hartman, further wrote, "So please cultivate your beginner's mind. Be willing not to be the expert. Be willing not to know. Not knowing is nearest. Not knowing is the most intimate." Intimacy was very important to me from the very earliest that I can remember. And as a very young man, a passionate, young, thinking Christian man of 18 years of age, I remember very clearly having this idealized vision of what I saw as a perfect relationship with another person. At every level of our beings, there would be this emotional, physical, intellectual, spiritual closeness, care, sharing, a beautiful intimacy. And that was really, really important to me, I remember. Well, it only took the whole of my first year uni at ANU, consumed by a frenzied and ultimately vain pursuit of my ideal man, who lived in the same hall of residence as I did, to teach me that there was something seriously wrong with my ideal, with my approach to embodying it anyway. Utter defeat. As a kid, my parents failed quite profoundly the intimacy test, not only with each other, but also each in his or her way with me. I don't blame them for that. I've taken responsibility for my life, but it's a fact. There was very little intimacy in my life as a child. And lacking intimacy, I was fairly unintegrated. I was needy, highly strung. And this sense of lack, as I experienced it as a child and then as an adolescent, and then even as an adult, needed to be filled. There was this terrible lack. I needed to fill it. And so at first, for me, the most clear answer was Christianity, which of course gave all of the answers and filled all of the holes and made everything right, I thought. But also there was this incredible sort of sense of competitiveness, which really was my aim to please, to excel, and really ultimately just to be accepted. And these things drove me. Then later, things, as they started to fall apart in all kinds of ways, I moved through the alcohol, the drugs, and a neurotic desire for friendship. Friendship isn't always something that's useful, especially when we're driven neurotically to want it. And this was even as I first started to come along to the Sydney Buddhist Centre after a pretty sort of a messy life, even up till that point. So then again, life was often okay, was even good sometimes, but more often it was characterized by loneliness, lack of connection and intimacy, alienation, incompleteness, depression, anxiety, and pretty much just dukkha. And I'm sure I'm not alone in that. So essentially, that child that I was, faced with everything that samsara could throw at me, it became me, the adult. My body, my mind, my heart ultimately was nothing but views, a fortress of views, which were erected to protect, to sustain myself. This fortress, sole purpose to keep me going with all my neediness, all my craving, my aggression, my protectiveness, my fear, my pride, my selfishness. My pathetic sense that this is just how life has to be lived. This is how I've always been. This is how I am. This is how I survive. No wonder I lacked connection and intimacy. But as already mentioned, I did start coming along to the Sydney Buddhist Centre, and it was in late 1999, and I was 47 years old. Even this was not a clear road for me for some years. But I did certainly find some relief. And more importantly, I began to meditate and learn the teachings of the Buddha, which to some extent I sought to apply to my life. Still very much, though, playing around at the edges. And how many of us are guilty of that, I wonder? It was only more than 10 years later in 2012 when I experienced a major nervous and physical breakdown that I found myself in a life and death struggle with samsara. And it was with the help of an insightful psychiatric therapist, and even more critically, the Buddha's teachings, particularly of Satipatthana and the true nature of the self, I entered upon a 6-year journey of discovery, healing, and transformation. So what have I discovered, or what has really been moving me? Well, yes, it is a question of intimacy. But what is intimacy, and why is it so critical? The Buddha has a different way of formulating the dilemma. But in essence, he says, I would never know intimacy with one other or others in general, or intimacy with the world, or intimacy with life, without experiencing intimacy with myself. The Buddha's message is about suffering and how to bring about an end to suffering. So that was pretty relevant to my dukkha. And he says, self is the problem. Self is the problem. That monolithic fortress self and suffering that I evoked a little earlier is created by feelings, by thoughts, by emotions right now, and then which link and intertwine with deeply embedded patterns from the past, and which self-perpetuate into the future. The Buddha, throughout his teaching career, and certainly in the Satipatthana and Anapanasati suttas, teaches us how to see deeply within, to how our self and how our suffering is created by us. Myself and my suffering are created by me. Curiosity, incredibly important. Curiosity in meditation, openness, vulnerability, love and self-care will enable us to spot, to stay with, to become intimate with what causes us pain. Don't run away from it. Don't turn away from it. Become intimate with it. If we are not fully present with whatever is arising for us right here and right now, no matter how uncomfortable, how can we hope to transform ourselves in ways that really we can't even begin to imagine? So let's go back to Suzuki and to his quote. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. The so-called expert is that fortress of views, that totally self-reliant tower of pain and suffering. The expert just cannot begin to imagine the limited nature of its pathetic, fatally limited programming. Unlike the defeated and needy child, which I've already evoked for you, me, beginner's mind is like a young child gazing out from a hilltop, across hills and valleys to the boundless ocean, and then still further beyond again, the furthest thing from needy. This child is fresh, curious, alive, open, free, not thwarted by the limitations of fixing, grasping, of knowing. The beginner's mind does not know. It is open to endless possibility. As Mary Oliver says so beautifully in her poem, Wild Geese, and I quote, "Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination." If I can follow the teachings of the Buddha to their depths, to their fullest extent, I will be able to declare, and again quoting Mary Oliver, "All my life I was a bride to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms." And so once again, the words of Zenkai Blanche Hartman that I quoted at the beginning. So please cultivate your beginner's mind. Be willing not to be an expert. Be willing not to know. Not knowing is nearest. Not knowing is the most intimate. So in intimacy, the therapeutic journey of integration becomes more and more a spiritual journey, a realization of open-ended possibility, a journey into shunyata, into emptiness, into the ultimate openness, not only of self, but of all things. It's a journey of adventure and fearlessness. It certainly requires fearlessness, but what wonderful adventure it can be. A journey of lila, or playfulness. A journey of fascination and ecstasy. There are so many other ways we can characterize what it is, but it's pretty damn good. So finding security, not in keeping things fixed or named or understood or controlled, all of which are characteristics of selfing, and not even really, I think anyway, not even finding security in change, which is certainly a further step along the way than what I just was talking about the knowing and the controlling. But even beyond that, it's just finding security, finding meaning in the question itself. Finding meaning in the question itself. That question which just keeps opening endlessly and inviting us onwards, tending more and more towards, well, towards what? Well, to finish, I find the words of the Heart Sutra evoke some sense of this. And dare I even imagine myself, possibly one beautiful, wonderful day, being something like the Bodhisattva who is here mentioned in the Heart Sutra. And I quote, "So know that the Bodhisattva, holding to nothing whatever, but dwelling in prajna wisdom, is freed of delusive hindrance, rid of the fear bred by it, and reaches clearest nirvana."